And the successor agency meeting.
Take care now.
Council members: Friedman.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Quintero.
Here. And for the successor agency.
Board members: Friedman.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Quintero.
Here.
The agenda for the February 12, 2013 joint public meeting of the City Council and Successor Agency was posted on Thursday, February 7, 2013 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Items before you today, number one is Successor Agency approval of the special Successor Agency meeting minutes of January 29, 2013.
I'll move the minutes.
Second.
The minutes stand approved as submitted. Next, please.
Number two is Directors of Community Development and Community Services and Parks regarding bid results for the 216 South Brand Boulevard and Central Park Paseo project in connection with the specification number 3461. 2A is a successor agency motion awarding a contract to PacWest Corporation in the amount of $1,277,000 plus contingency of $240,400. B is council motion authorizing a reimbursement agreement between the city and the successor agency for reimbursement of up to $165,000 for construction costs to the city for the Central Park Paseo Minimal Improvements Design Alternative portion. C is successor agency motion authorizing a reimbursement agreement between the city and the successor agency for reimbursement of up to $165,000 of construction costs to the city for the Central Park Paseo Minimal Improvements Design Alternative portion.
Ochoa.
Yes, sir. We have the once and future project that is the shell of the Mona building and the Paseo build-out. Our executive officer, Phil Lanzafame, will walk us through what the bid results were. Phil?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chairman, members of the City Council and the Successor Agency. This is one of our final redevelopment projects. It is coming back to you after several of your approvals, and this is the next milestone where we would like to award a bid. As I said before, this is one of our final redevelopment projects. In March of 2011, we entered into an agreement with the Museum of Neon Art. In that ground lease that provides for the terms of the agreement, there was certain work that the landlord, the redevelopment agency, was to undertake. In October of this last year, the successor agency and City Council approved the bid specs to do that work, and we advertised to note this, as I said, was a redevelopment project. It has been listed on a recognized obligation payment schedule, which has been approved by our oversight board and first the successor agency, but the oversight board and the Department of Finance. The funding through this ROPS period has been approved. A summary from the work that we were to do that was included in the bid package that you all saw in October. Some structural improvements, fire protection, and ADA upgrades to get us to code, to get the building to code. We also want to do some new doors and openings that will open up onto an adjacent paseo and hope to generate some pedestrian activity and interest. We'll be updating the roof, the drainage system, the plumbing system, and electrical systems there, and then also giving it a new look on the exterior. We will also be demolishing the building to the south, which is where the paseo will ultimately go. This, again, reminder, this is the design that was approved, that was included with the bid specifications. We have a strategy in place to do the paseo. They are two separate projects. The paseo we originally had anticipated doing with bond funds, the 2010 bond funds. Unfortunately, with recent legislation, we're unable to commit those funds until we get what's called a finding of completion. It says that you've done everything you're supposed to do throughout this dissolution process. We anticipate getting that in the spring, within the next few months, which will allow us then to incorporate the larger paseo project that again, the redevelopment agency and successor agency saw preferred and approved. But in case we can't, we've also brought to you a minimal paseo that could be done with city funding. That strategy was also part of our package to you, and we've not deviated from that.
Understanding that those bond funds really can't be used for anything else. There's no benefit or legal authority for the state to take those funds. They're just denying us use of those funds until we get the finding of completion.
And I should also note that our bond indenture says we would use it for this particular project, so it's not something that we can use just willy-nilly. We did put an alternate in case we couldn't use the, for whatever reason, the bond funding wasn't approved by the Department of Finance. The reimbursement agreement that we're asking you to approve is merely a mechanism so that one entity, the successor agency, can hold the entire contract. If it's necessary for us to do the minimal paseo, then we would continue on with the contract that we're entering into, and the city would just reimburse the successor agency for those funds pursuant to the approved funding plan. This, as I was looking at this, may not be the most colorful picture, but it is a representation of the more minimal scored concrete. You'll see on the right-hand side some drought-tolerant vegetation, trees for shade in the middle, minimal lighting. This is in-site plan of the larger project. It included some special paving and flooring, some water features, and enhanced landscaping. Oops. And then this is a rendering of what that larger paseo would look like. This is what we will build, and timing will work well if when we get our approval, if we get our approval, to then incorporate it into this project. We advertised for bids following your approval on the October 30th and 31st. We had a base bid, and then we had some deductive alternates. Those are things in case the bid came in over the engineer's estimate, we would know already what we were taking out. And then some allowances, including the paseo. There's some others for the roof. 12 contractors and 2 subcontractors attended our mandatory meeting and resulted in us receiving 5 bids. This is the result of those bids. Pac West had the lowest base bid and total bid. They're flip-flopped because of those deductive alternatives. Staff evaluated these with the city attorney's office and outside counsel. Staff is recommending that we accept the Pac West bid in the amount of $1,277,000. This is a summary of the fiscal impact of the project. In total, 1.6. The Department of Finance has approved 2.3. We will have further requests as we get to that spending in that ROPS period for any balance needed. Quick schedule. We're here in February in the second item asking you to award the contract. We hope to get notice to proceed and start construction in April. Demolition of that southern building will take place first, and then we'll move through the building, foundation framing, and then exterior finishes. We noted this because we're cognizant of some of the new retail that is coming online and the new look that Brand Boulevard will have. We're trying to time this. We'll just be a little bit behind, but we should have things in a presentable state for the time that Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom open. And then we will finish out our punch list items, those final things, January, February. With that, staff is recommending award a bid to Pac West in the amount noted. That includes a contingency. We're also recommending approval of the reimbursement agreement from both the successor agency and the City Council. The project team that's working on this and put together the bid is here, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Ms. Friedman.
Well, first, I think it's a very exciting project. It's something that will lead people into our Central Park, our library space, and our adult recreation center right from Brand for the first time. And it's right across the street from the Americana, where visitors to Glendale who may not know that those amenities exist will have a view right into that park and be led out of the Americana and into a civic space. So I think that's all wonderful. I have a question about the Mona signs that are right now beautifying West Hollywood. So my question is, number one, when can we get those signs out of West Hollywood and onto Brand Boulevard? And number two, can we use the ROPS funding to install those signs, as they're really part of Mona's display, and we have a contract with Mona?
We have looked at possibly taking those signs, putting them in the median, for example, in the Brand Boulevard
Right.
cars. The Mona folks have indicated that they're amenable to making those moves. The problems that we have are with the installation and construction costs for what amounts to temporary pedestals. And that, my understanding is that that would not be included under our ROPS. We would have to come up with strictly City of Glendale funding to wire those and put in place the concrete pedestals. Not a lot of money necessarily, but certainly something that's noteworthy.
So even though that's part of Mona, the ROPS won't pay for that?
No, they've taken a really jaundiced eye in terms of what is the project. The project that was approved was the
Right.
Shell and the Paseo.
Okay.
We've been trying to get those things over, and the Mona people have been great about saying, yes, we want to make the migration.
Okay. And what about Americana? Are they interested in any of those signs? Or
That's a good
Galleria?
question.
Or Galleria?
We, honestly, I don't know, Phil, I don't know if you've had that discussion. I have not.
We've had a discussion with the Americana for some of their special events. In fact, they're going to have an event, Breathe LA, that you alerted us to, where it's going to be a fashion show. And there may be the opportunity to mount some fashion-related signs as a backdrop. That's going to happen in the summer so that we clear good weather. And we'll continue to talk with the museum as well as the Americana to try and make that happen and get those signs visible in Glendale.
Great. Thank you.
Question.
Jerry?
Are we going to have a construction manager for this? Because I think we should. I think it's a good idea that we have someone riding in light of our limited funds. I mean, if this were to run over budget, would we have to go back to the Department of Finance and say, give us more money, we had an overrun or a mismanaged
Yes.
construction? How are we going to handle that?
Mr. Najarian, the staff of economic development, the former redevelopment staff, they're really, really good at project management, but it is not a technical skill that they have. And so the instruction has always been have a construction manager. Audrey Gold-Nazarian with Community Services has been, she's managed other projects for the city, and she has been on this project from the get-go. And so we actually have a construction manager that has overseen that and will make sure that all of those things that need to happen do happen.
And the contingency that is in place is substantial. The contingency.
Yes. The contingency is substantial. It's 20%. Because we're looking at an older building, when we open it up, we're not sure what we'll find. So we did make accommodations for that.
Okay. I'm just a little concerned about that. We have had several instances in our Glendale's history where a construction project had a construction manager, an in-house construction manager, and we had huge problems with that. I just want to make sure we're really paying close attention to that issue, especially in light of the fact that it's an older building.
Yes.
Despite what appears to be a large cushion of contingency. Let's just be really careful about that.
Yes.
My next question is, let's assume this is completed. Who is going to be in charge of the management and any issues that may arise if we were, let's say, not able to deliver on time to Mona for whatever reason? Let's say it's related to management issues in construction. Do they have a cause of action against Glendale for not delivering on time? Who would be responsible for that? What actual agency? Would it still be the successor agency? Or, since the Department of Finance has sucked this all in, are they the ones responsible? How does that whole relationship work in light of them stepping in the shoes of the former redevelopment agency?
I'm obviously going to defer to my counsel, who's...
Sure, members of the successor agency and city council. The relationship is governed by the existing lease. And to the extent that there are delays that may fall under a force majeure clause, of course, we'd be looking at something like that if it's something that can be cured within a reasonable period of time. So the expectation is that the parties will be looking to that agreement and will be addressing those issues or concerns that may reasonably come up, might delay in some instances on both sides, performance. But typically, as the council, I'm sure, is aware, you look to try and cure those things within a reasonable period of time. To the extent that they can't be cured, it may result in a cause of action on one or the other side in order to obtain performance, but we don't anticipate that happening. The Department of Finance and the Oversight Board do not step into the shoes of the successor agency. The obligations under that former agreement with the former redevelopment agency all flowed to the successor agency. So that's the relationship right now, and it's governed under that lease.
Right, but we have no assets.
But what
Successor
we have is an existing enforceable obligation, and that's the reason why Mr. Lanzafame indicated that there's $2.3 million earmarked on the ROPS and approved for this project. And so to the extent that we have an existing enforceable obligation that's been approved by the Department of Finance, they will continue to allow a tax increment to flow to the agency for purposes of fulfilling that. So we have an agreement with them that this is, in fact, an enforceable obligation. We will receive money for it.
Wait, so they would pay for any overruns?
You know, that is something that could be called into question. We've seen them question a lot of different things. There's certainly authority under the statute, both to fulfill the existing enforceable obligations and to enter into new agreements that are anticipated by that existing enforceable obligation approved by the DOF. As we go forward, to the extent that we need to expand these things, it may be called into question. We may end up in a meet and confer with them. We have in the past been able to convince them that it's reasonable to allow projects to be completed that are well underway. It's hard to read the crystal ball. You're right. There certainly may be an instance where they might object to something, but it certainly would seem unreasonable when pressed to not allow us to complete, put us in a position to be exposed to damages and claims if we're not able to complete.
But let's say, I hate to be, taking these inquiries on things that could go wrong. We hope nothing goes wrong, but in construction projects, there's a huge opportunity. So I understand about the cost overrun issue and perhaps being entitled to continue to receive tax increment. But how about damages? I mean, let's say there's a goof. Goofs happen all the time. The floors aren't even. The electrical panel blows up or whatever. Mona is damaged. They're an ongoing entity, and despite the terms of the lease, which I think are very favorable to them, we're not able to keep our end of, let's say, move in or promise the exact structure that we have promised them. And they sue us. Us would be the successor agency. But we don't have any money. We don't have reserves where we can say, okay, we blew it here, take this money. Is the city in any way going to be responsible for that?
Definitively no. And that would certainly be an instance where it may create a new obligation of the successor agency. We'd place it on our ROPS. Settlements that are approved by courts or judgments are enforceable obligations. I think there was some forecasting that of these possibilities, so no, it would be an obligation of the successor agency. We'd have to jump through quite a few hoops out of the ordinary for us in order to get the monies approved for that, but no, the city would definitely not be on the hook for
Great pains were taken to separate legally and politically the cities from the successor agencies as lawful entities to transact business. But it does beg this question that if there were damages, if there were something to come, and let's say that we would put it onto the ROPS, and the ROPS were denied by the state, would not then the state be a party to some lawsuit from, in this case, Mona?
Right.
Right. Remember, the underlying theory of the dissolution law was that all enforceable obligations had to be maintained, had to be satisfied. So if we have the agency has an obligation to provide a building, in this case, a building at a certain level, and for some reason, due to the contractor's inability to perform or what have you, whatever the reason might be, the underlying theory of that law is that no contractual obligation is supposed to be impaired. So we should be able to stick that on our ROPS. And another thing, keep in mind, this is a public works contract, for lack of a better term, that we're successor agencies enter into. We will have a performance bond. We will have the contractor has his or her obligations, which they have to meet. And so, under the theory of breach of contract, if we get sued, we would be looking to the contractor for performance on that as well.
Will the successor agency sunset? I mean, are we going to be in existence as long as we still have have capital projects and buildings, or how does that work?
As we liquidate assets and as we are eventually winding down, the Glendale Successor Agency will eventually be no more at some point.
That will happen, but you do have agreements
Right.
that run for another 30
Right.
years. So there will be some structure in place to make sure that we do that. The Walt Disney Company and GC3, for instance, that's 20 or 30 years of setting aside increment and then reinvesting it in public improvements.
There will be a collapsing of the oversight boards into one oversight board overseeing all of the agencies, former agencies within the county, but individual successor agencies will remain in place.
All right, thank you for those answers to my questions.
I have some questions. Starting with the timing, in terms of the project itself, is this a situation where the contractor is going to try to kind of do the paseo first, in the sense that at least have some sort of throughway?
You know, Mr. Mayor, were we not dissolved, that may be something that we would want to do to make it usable right of way. Because we're forced into this situation of not knowing, can we build the paseo we're supposed to build, that's going to come at the tail end. There's some work that needs to be done on the south side of the building anyway, but we're going to put that at the end so that we should know by April if we're going to get our finding of completion, which will release our bond funds and allow us to do the full-blown paseo. So that will probably come in at the tail end of the project.
Well, if that's the case, and I just wonder whether the demolition, after it's done, there could at least be a passageway 6 feet with a chain link fence or something so that people from the library don't have to go all the way around.
We'll look at something that we
That
can,
would make some sense.
that we can keep access, keep clean, and
Yeah,
in a safe condition.
Okay, then the low bidder, quite a bit lower than the successful contract was quite a bit lower than some of the other bids. The company has a pretty extensive background in terms of some of the public projects that they've done, from schools to you name it, sometimes as a sub, it seems, and other times as a general. How much, did you all really do your due diligence to talk to the different entities? They've done a lot of work.
Ask the project staff to.
They've done a lot of work specifically for LA Unified.
Mr. Mayor, members of the Successor Agency and Council. Yes, given that this project is going to be managed by our office, Community Services and Parks, we have done extensive outreach to the referrals that they have provided, both in terms of a general contractor as well as some of the specialty subs. I believe there were 5 specialty subcontractors that the general contractor had to name and provide specific references for, and those have also been vetted before recommending their selection.
Okay, you said that the ones that they recommended you call, but on your own, have you talked to anyone other than those? That's the oldest game in the world to send you the happy customers. Have you also? You're shaking your head, so I assume you have talked to others that they've done work for.
Mr. Mayor, I personally have spoken to, I believe, 12 people, some of them references that they had named, and some of them acquaintances, and the architects of their projects, and the owners' representatives of their previous projects.
Right.
We have done quite extensive
Great,
reference
that's
checks.
good, and that's what you need to do. Okay, great, that sounds good. Well, once again, I'm very happy we're moving forward, and hopefully we're going to bring it to fruition. And as I've said many times, whether it works out with Mona or not, I think that building, and of course the Paseo, will be a tremendous location for any substitute use. Once this is done and it's built and ready to go, hopefully the relationship with Mona works out. Sometimes relationships don't. We're going to have a great public structure there that we can either lease out or bring in another museum or nonprofit, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully we're going to complete the project, and I think Brand will be in much better shape as a result. Mr. Menuchyan.
This is not for the Mona project, it's for the Paseo, I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
It's for the shell of the Mona project, the construction as well as the shell.
What do you mean the shell? The shell of the building?
If I may, yes. The landlord's work under the lease involves preparing the shell of the building. Tenant improvements come later, and there is some tenant improvement allowance from the successor agency that's part, but that's a later piece. This first piece is just readying the shell of the building so that Mona can come in and commence tenant improvements.
So strictly speaking, the short answer to your question would be you are correct. This is not the Mona project, but this is the location where the Mona project would go.
Okay. Is this part of the contract with the Mona project? Or is it?
We have obligations as the landlord.
As a landlord under the lease.
And this is part of it?
That's correct. That would be the only way that the successor agency could pay for this piece, because it's an obligation, an existing enforceable obligation of the successor agency as the landlord.
The lease itself, you mean?
That's correct.
And if we defaulted on the lease, they would have to sue the successor agency. That's what you were saying earlier.
That's correct.
City.
Those are the
And the
parties.
successor agency has no money.
The successor agency's money is what flows to it through the
the
ROPS.
state, right.
To the extent that there is a judgment, that we would place that judgment on the ROPS, and that is recognized in the dissolution law as an enforceable obligation. So we would expect to get payment for it.
Okay, well, I've opposed this project from the beginning, so I will be voting no on item A, but I do support the reimbursement agreements, so.
All right, do I have a motion?
I'll just make the
Or
comment,
comment.
I'm opposed to Mona too, but I understand the separation of the two. Because if Mona never came, another entity could come into that building,
That's correct.
as we'll be improving the infrastructure in the building. As well, I'll support it, so I'll make the motion.
A second?
Second.
Roll call?
And is that the motion for 1A?
Yeah.
2A?
Yeah.
2A, I meant. Board members Friedman,
Yes.
Menuchyan,
No.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Quintero.
Yes. Motion?
Okay, move 2B.
And C?
Second?
Roll call?
Those cannot be voted together.
Sorry.
Yeah, council members Friedman,
Yes.
Menuchyan,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Quintero.
Yes.
I'll move 2C.
Second?
Roll call?
Board members Friedman,
Yes.
Menuchyan,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Quintero.
Yes. What's next?
Move to adjourn for the council,
Second.
We are adjourned.
to adjourn for the successor agency.
Second.
We are adjourned.